Boom, I'm in the room. Welcome to Everyday Conversations Regarding Mental Health, coming to you live from the Heale Manor. As always, because there's nothing on the telly, you might as well stick around and watch this. I've got a great show for you this evening. This evening we're going to be talking about bullying and child suicide and all the aspects around the problems that kids go through nowadays. It's horrendous, some of the stuff that you hear, and what drives people to abusing children, what drives a bully, what drives a child to take their own life. And we're going to be talking about that with my guest tonight. So without too much further ado, I'm going to bring my guest in. So welcome, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Tim, for having me on your show.
No, you're absolutely welcome. We've had a little bit of a chat before the show, and I've got an idea of what's coming. And I think this is a very, very important message that we're going to be putting out this evening around the childhood suicide rates, about bullying and what drives a bully to do what they do, and the unintended consequences behind that, which is, I mean, we see it a lot. I mean, America's just had that incident down in, was it Tennessee, down in Nashville, where it appears that it was a student that's come back to the school and brassed the place up, for want of another word. But it happens all too often, unfortunately. So, Elizabeth, if you can tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, and where you come into this conversation.
Sure. So my name is Elizabeth Bennett, and I'm here in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. My background is that I've had over 35 years of teaching administration experience, and I come from the education system. I've just recently retired as I'm an award-winning school principal, and I just launched my new book called Courageous Conversations, a guide for parents to understand and connect with their teens. Here's what I know to be true at the moment. Bullying is rampant. Mental health concerns are through the roof. Social isolation. It's wonderful to have this cell phone and have all of the ability to be in contact with people around the world, to get information at at your fingertips. But the challenge is that it's also a space of social isolation, because kids, well, even as adults, we dive into what's going on Facebook or TikTok or Instagram or whatever social media outlet that we go into, and we're looking for our likes, and we're looking to be acknowledged, and we're looking to be in a space where, this is the perfect virtual world. And then we come back to reality and live in the lives that we do. And sometimes what happens with that is, because we don't have the skills and strategies as young people in particular, their brain hasn't developed. Their frontal brain, it takes quite a while. What we've noticed is that with research over the past years, we have found out that, our brain function doesn't mature at the same age as our age. And so, as an example, for a young person who might be 10 or 11 years old, we just assume that they know things, and we've shown them things, and they have a head on their shoulders, and they should be able to think and remember and act accordingly, and not like someone who might be in first year or grade 1, or who might be like their. And what we've learned recently is that the brain development takes a lot longer. So the maturity of the brain doesn't really end until somewhere in their 20s. So when we say something like, Well, what were you thinking? Really, truly, that child, when they say, I don't know, really means it, because oftentimes the development of that part of their brain that makes decision making, that makes problem solving, and does all those things isn't truly developed. And so they do often make choices that are not sometimes the most appropriate ones. So we have to work with helping them to understand and understand the impact of the decisions that they make and the actions that they take, or the ones that they don't make. And so that's part of where we're going. But the most and and I have to tell you that I really love teenagers. I love their piss and vinegar. I love their raging hormones. I love their defiance. And my favorite thing is, you know, girls with their eye rolling. I think they have it down to a fine science. And quite frankly, I think they've been practicing since they were in grade two. But having said all that, the piece about it that's the most disconcerting for me is that youth are choosing a permanent solution to a temporary problem. And what I mean by that is that they're choosing to take their lives because they don't see any way out, or they don't understand that there's other perspectives, that there's other choices that they can make. If they shared in conversation with an adult, with whether it's a caregiver or someone a teacher or a coach at school, and really what I want them to be doing is having those conversations with their parents at home. And if their parents really understood what was going on with them, you know, understood more about, sometimes their erratic behavior, or understood more about their feelings and their emotions, or so on. And that can only be done through conversation. And the reason that I call the book Courageous Conversations is because it takes a lot of courage to step out of your own comfort zone, to be vulnerable, to say and do things that help you to make those connections with our kids.
Wow, that's a powerful message. Where do you think it starts? I mean, quite often, particularly in this day and age, um, kids get bullied at school. They go
Yeah.
home, and it carries on there because they've got these. They've got the mobile phone,
Yeah.
and it can be relentless, 24/7. Lots of people have a problem with social media. They don't know when to pull the pin on it and walk away, or to ignore it, or to switch it off. And I think that's one of the big problems, is that they just don't know when to switch it off. And if they're getting abused at school, and then they carry it on the phone, um, and then they've got parents that have gone through similar when they were kids, and they don't know how to deal with it,
Yeah.
and then they fall into that abuse of their own children. They don't listen to them. They're too busy with their own lives to, or they haven't had good parenting skills taught to them in the first place. Then you can see where a child's coming from, where they're getting bullied at school, they're getting bullied on their social media, they're getting bullied at home, and it's no wonder that they do something silly. And yeah, I don't know the real answer. Perhaps parents should be going back to school and learning some parenting skills. Perhaps they should have that as a class, parenting skills, how to understand teenagers. Because, I mean, I guess we all went through it. I mean, for some of us, it's an awful long time ago since I was a teenager. but, but I mean, kids think that they know everything, and pretty much they don't know anything. They've barely scratched the surface of what they know. And if they was to listen to older people that have got life experience, then and learn from those lessons that the hard way. That I'm sure I certainly have learned the hard way over the years. I mean, there's two ways of learning. There's the easy way and there's the hard way, and more often than not, we choose the hard way to learn.
I think that's, yeah, and I think that's a perennial thing. I think we've all been there and done that, and some of us are better for it in most cases. But going back to what you said before about bullying in schools, it's
Mm,
often been said that that's where it starts, and the the irony about it is that that's not what we teach. We're teaching morals, and we're teaching values, and we're
yeah.
teaching good manners, and we're trying to do lots about helping kids see that the way they show up and the way they do things, and we teach them about leadership skills, and we try and relate it to what they're learning in school, plus what's it going to look like when they go out into the real world. So we're doing much more with that, about getting them really engaged. But the piece that's the challenge, and you also mentioned this, and I point back here often when I say, this is our past.
Mm,
But what ends up happening with that is that our past ends up showing up in front of us. So, and I'll call them filters for the purposes of this example. So we have filters where we listen through. We have filters that we see through. We have filters that we speak through, because that's from where we've come from. Excuse me. And our children have them as well. So they have their own filters, the way they see and the way they hear and the way they speak too. And they get those matched against ours. So, for example, if a child constantly hears yelling in the house, then that's how they're expecting you to show up all the time. And
mm,
so part of what I do when I'm coaching parents is I'll say to them, this is the courage piece that you need to step through and be responsible for your actions too, and those that you've had. And it's not easy, because we've grown into that feeling of, you know, I should be the mother or father, and I should it all, everything should be the way that it is for me. I grew up like that, and um, it wasn't very successful because I pushed against it. But that's what my parents knew at that time, and
mm,
that's what they had lived through. So that was the only experience that they could use to move forward. And now there are many more opportunities for parents to learn new skills. And I mean, I happen to have just written a book on it. That's an opportunity. But I also coach parents, so I do that privately as well. And I take them through some of those stages so that they can learn to try new perspectives. And this is not remotely about judgment. This is not about, you're a bad parent or so on. This is, what can we do to get started now? And how is it
mm,
that I can now help my child? And part of that too is the way that we need to shift the way that we have conversation with our kids, because it can no longer be, and I refer to it as a pendulum. So, there was a time, and this was certainly through my growing up, and I was born a minute or two ago, where um, children should be seen and not heard. Money doesn't grow on trees. Don't cry, or I'll give you something to cry about. You know, what do you mean you're speaking to me like that? Children should be seen and not heard. So there's a whole bunch of um, experiences and things that we hold on to, even if we don't say them out loud. They're still part of our makeup and our experience and where we've come from. And so we can choose to stay in that, and in some cases that's not very helpful, because that creates a situation where there's always going to be that pushback, or those banging heads, or however we want to relate to it in terms of having those conversations with our children. And what I've seen with that pendulum is now it's swung way in the other direction, where that, kids and their parents are, best friends. There's a space and a time for that, but it's not necessarily in those formative years, because
Mm.
we still need to be able to provide kids with safety. And that means, the safety around us and the foundation of what our family unit looks like. And it's also a place as well where we can create those boundaries. And yes, we've all been there. We've all pushed the boundaries. We want to see what's going to happen. How far can we go, and so on. And that's natural. But there's still a place of having conversation. And that wasn't always the way. It was, you're going to do it my way, or it's the highway, or whatever kind of term you've heard.
Mhm.
And now it needs to be really in a space where we are creating a collaborative, um, a contributory type of relationship, so that it becomes powerful and it becomes connected and it becomes a place of safety and trust and understanding from both sides. And sure, with some families that's easy peasy, with others, not so much. And so that's the space where I have conversation to say, you really need to understand where your children are coming from. You need to understand what's going on, because behavior is part of communication. And rather than only responding to the behavior, we need to find out what's created that behavior.
Mm.
What's brought that on? So tell me a little bit more about that. And so part of that is a new shifting in language. It's becoming curiously engaged, and it's also a space of, and this is one of the 5 strategies of dedicated listening that I talk about in my book. It's about understanding versus judgment. So we can jump to a conclusion about how we think things should be, or what our child is telling us, or so on. But then there's also that space where we need to move the judgment out of the way, and we need to understand what's going on with them. And so we're more likely to find out if there's bullying. We're more likely to find out if there's stuff going on with relationships at school, if there's breakdown, if there are struggles, if there's stuff going on in the cell phone, if we have that space of understanding, if we have that space of the beginning of trust. Now, having
Mm.
said all that, if we're in a place in our home, because you mentioned that before too, if our home life is unstable, or uh, an additional space of bullying or so on, then that child doesn't have that opportunity to be able to speak about it at home, because,
Mm.
oh, you're just crying, and you got to suck it up, or you got to be boys don't cry, or you need to man it up, or you need to do stuff. And oh my gosh, so many of those statements are so incredibly hurtful, probably not intended when the parent had said it, but it's the impact of those words that are lingering and that go on, and then that person doesn't know how to balance their behaviors
Mm.
or their emotions. And
Well, I've got an incident where when I must have been about 5, maybe 6 or 7, um, where we had a bully in our class, and he'd go around and pick on different people, and he started picking on me. And I went home and asked the old man, uh, this lad's picking on me, what should I do? He said, well, son, the best thing you do is give him a thump and make it a good one, because he's probably going to give you an hiding anyway. So anyway, I goes in school the next day. He starts on me. All anybody saw was me give him a thump. He
mm,
goes flying back into the school pond. I gets carted off to the headmaster's office, and I got 6 of the best. I mean, I felt pretty, a lot of injustice in that. But he never he never picked on me again, and I never had any other bullies pick on me, because that story went round fairly rapidly, and it carried on when I went to secondary school. I mean, it was a rough area where where I was brought up, and I mean, got into lots of punch ups occasionally, but generally won them, and people didn't start once they've seen you've been picked on a few times, and you stand up for yourself, they leave you alone. I found that bullies tend to be cowards. They tend to be insecure themselves, and that's why they pick on somebody that's they perceive to be weaker than them. And I think that's part of the problem. They
Hmm.
probably come from an unstable background themselves. Um,
And
so
they're
so
trying to release some of their own pain, right?
yeah,
So they want to push it away and they
yeah,
don't know how to do it appropriately. So they choose to pick on someone else.
yeah. And then they normally get a little gang around them that thinks that they're the big I am, and they're the insecure ones that thrive on the other weak people that will go around with them. So you get a little gang goes around, and then
Yep.
they find a target, um, and unless that target stands up for themselves, they won't move on, and they'll just carry on picking on that person.
Yeah.
Um, and that's what it was like when I was a kid, and I used to stand up for some of these poor kids that was getting picked on, and that's why I used to get the odd scrape now and then. But we didn't have that social media where you could walk away from it. Um, it just wasn't there, and we were out on the streets most of the time. But nowadays, I feel sorry for kids that are going through that bullying, and then it carries on online, and they don't know, and they come from an unstable background. The parents aren't really there for them. They tend to be latchkey kids. They tend to be the type of kid that
Yep.
um, has come from a broken home background. The parents have split up. They've gone to work. They've got other siblings from different marriages. You see a lot of that. So you've got internal struggles at home with other, parents are remarried or got together with somebody else, brought their kids into the equation. Yeah, it's lots and lots of pressures put on kids nowadays, I guess, where it kind of starts at the home, gets carried on into schools, um, and ends up in a tragedy. And I think
Yep.
that's
Because they don't see any place that's going
where
to
they
be
can go.
supportive enough to be able to help them out, right?
Yeah.
So what I've noticed through the years certainly is, and some of my experience are similar to yours, where there were times where kids would rally around and so on and cheer on the kid who was the big bully. And what we're seeing now, hopefully and thankfully, is that those children also can be charged. So in some cases, if it's a severe situation where maybe the police are now involved because the family's gone to the police to report and say, hey, this is a really harmful situation, then now the warning space is much more, or it's beginning to be much more strict in terms of being able to say, you can't stand around and cheer this on because you're equally as guilty for not doing anything.
Yeah.
Then we have the other side of the equation where we have kids who aren't certain whether they should report or so on. And we're beginning to have way more conversations with those kids to say, yes, it's important for you to do that. And it isn't about because we have this quote, and I don't know whether you've heard it lately, but snitches get stitches. And
Mm.
so we're encouraging those kids who see something going on to report it, because what they're doing is sometimes helping to save somebody else's life. And wouldn't you want that wouldn't you want somebody to take your side? Wouldn't you want somebody to step in for you too if that situation was happening to you? And so
Yeah, I
we're,
mean,
trying to build the courage for the kids who don't know quite what to do, or that's their friend, or, they might be next, because if that bully is picking on that kid, they're certainly going to come after me too. And that's
mm,
where, it's important when the school and the parents work together rather than feeling like they're at odds ends with each other, because we're all in this together to help support our children have success and to help support them get through school and to learn good things and to move forward so that they are strong and confident and courageous leaders. And right now, not, I mean, we're always looking to the future, but certainly for right now, we want them to be that way now. We want them to
mm,
have those skills and that voice and be valued for who they are at whatever age they are. And so we continue to build on those skills and work together with families in order to make that happen. But I hear what you're saying too. I mean, certainly there
mm,
are lots of families who, for whatever situation, whatever their
yeah,
background is, right? They're trying to hold down two or three jobs. They're trying to give their children a better life than they had, wherever they're coming from, whatever place and space in the world. And they're here in our countries and they're doing the best they can. But what ends up
mm,
happening is their kids then sometimes are finding unsavory characters to be with, because gangs are also a type of family, although not
yeah,
the best choice. But that's a place of
yeah.
recognition, it's a place of acknowledgement, it's a place of community, it's a place of support.
Well,
Not the
that's
best
that's
choice, like I
that's
said,
something
but
that the
that happens too, right?
yeah, well, that's something that the British Army taught us. The values and standards of the British Army, and some of those values and standards are um, courageous,
Mm.
or being have the courage and the moral courage, if you see something that's not right, to do something about it. The integrity, if you know something's wrong, to to stand up and say something, and the selfless commitment to put others before yourself. If you see somebody that's being bullied, then have the selfless commitment, the courage and integrity to go and do something about it. Whether it's go and step in on the bully yourself and to get them to stop, or to go and report it. I mean,
Mhm.
that's some of the things that they should be teaching kids nowadays.
Yeah.
The self discipline to to be able to stand up and do that. I think those are some of the key lessons that they should be teaching in school, and not wait until you get into later life to learn them. They should be
Yeah.
sort of the basic values and standards that everybody should live to. Um, and I think that's important, that that it's to teach people that they should, if they see something going wrong, have the moral courage to do something about it, to report it to somebody. And like you say,
Yeah.
to step in the early stages, it can save somebody a lot of pain and hurt, but also could save a life. And I think
Yeah.
that's one of the things that needs to happen, is that the unprecedented number of young people that are taking their lives. I know here in the UK, it's up in the top sort of five reasons why young people are dying,
Yeah.
is taking their own lives, and I think it's even higher in places like America and Canada.
Yeah. In North America, it's the second cause of death. And I was just in Hawaii at Christmas time, and in one of the sections of the local newspaper, it indicated that there in Hawaii, it's the first cause of death. And I can appreciate that because, kids don't have anywhere to go. And I think what they see and what they feel and what's going on in their head, there's so much that's happening. So, as an example, kids worry about whether they have the right haircut, whether they have the right clothes on, whether they have the right shoes to fit in, whether they have friends or whether they don't have friends. Are they being bullied at school? What's going on in the classroom? Are they keeping up with their studies? They have the pressures of their family, their expectations of family. Is there stuff going on at home or so on? And then they have, they might like somebody, and, people are teasing them about liking that person, or, there's frustration and there's fear and there's love and acceptance. If they're on a team, are they a good sports person, or music or dance or whatever? And they're comparing themselves, and there's all kinds of judgment and there's worry. So you can imagine how much that weighs on someone who's 10 or 12, right? It's like carrying a backpack with rocks on it, and each of those rocks has one of those statements that I've just measured. And they carry that by themselves all day, all night, and they don't know how to take those rocks out or take those feelings, because they don't even know how to manage the feelings. They're built up inside, and there's all kinds of confusion, and if they're hearing things that aren't acceptable at home, if they're hearing about, one of their parents is saying something rude, crude, and socially unacceptable, or they have a thought process about a particular gender or a particular uh, culture or so on, and they're hearing that kind of stuff, then they don't feel like they have a place to be able to say that, or to say, I'm feeling this way, or I don't know how I'm feeling, but and so that's where all of those uh, behaviors end up showing up, when they get frustrated and they get angry and they yell and scream, and their parents are doing the same, and they can't come to any kind of agreement or conversation space that's safe and caring. And so then they're looking for people at school, and depending on what the nature of the relationship is with teachers at school, can they share that with them? Can they share it with a coach? And sometimes it's there's just so much going on for them that they don't see that there are other places. They don't see, because all they see is all of this stuff coming in on them all the time, and it weighs heavy, and they can't see the light
Mm.
for what they imagine is the train instead of the light at the end of the tunnel. And so then they just choose to, some of them are doing drugs or or alcohol, or they start cutting themselves, and they start, in some cases, some of them are just hurting other people, because that's the way they just want to get it away from them. And then they get
Mm.
to a place in a space where, it's easier just to end my life, because nobody cares about me anyway. Nobody values me, nobody listens, nobody does anything. And those are some of the unfortunate and heart-wrenching spaces and places that kids get into. And
Mm.
often when I have this conversation with parents, I'll say that the second cause of death is suicide. And parents will, because you can hear them mumbling, and they'll say, oh, that couldn't happen to my kid, that wouldn't happen. And yet I've spoken with several parents who have lost children to suicide, and they said, we had no idea.
Yeah, and that's the problem, because so many people just clam up and don't say anything,
Yeah,
and that's where that um, stitch a snitch
yeah,
comes in, is because people for so long, it's a stigma to talk about,
yeah,
or,
yeah,
or to sort of rat on somebody. But
yeah,
if you don't, then that's the consequences. I mean, quite often you'll see kids self harming, and that is one of the classic signs that they're not happy.
hmm,
Um, and and if a parent doesn't pick up on it, um, if the teachers don't pick up on it, their mates surely must see it happening.
yeah.
So it's I guess
Well,
it
and we
goes.
always see clearly after the fact, right?
Oh yeah, I mean hindsight's a wonderful thing.
Wonderful thing. Yeah.
A wonderful thing. Hindsight. Well, I didn't didn't see that coming, but it happened. Um, so I think the message that we're trying to push out is that although it's okay not to be okay, it's okay to do something, to
Yeah.
report something, to highlight something's not right with somebody. Somebody's causing harm to somebody else, and it could end up horrible. And it's difficult at the best times to lose a parent or a spouse, but to lose a child when it is preventable, that hurts. That is very, very hurtful to everybody involved. And after after the event, and the bully is identified, how are they going to spend the rest of their life? How will they live with themselves? And I think that's one of the things that probably contributes. If a bully has worked out that it's their actions that have caused somebody to take their life, they end up taking their own life,
Yeah.
and because they can't live with themselves. But had they stood up in the first place, and somebody had said something, it could have been prevented.
Well, and redirected them too, right? Because
Yeah, absolutely.
oftentimes we need to, and that's the place where sometimes our social services, kids fall through the cracks because they're not identified, or the services aren't available, or you have to make a certain amount of money, or there's a stigma attached with families, don't want to go for help because they can manage it themselves, and they can't
Mm.
because they don't know how. And it's not a fault or a problem. It's just we need to be breaking through that particular stigma too. Now, the other piece that often happens is that kids are getting involved with so many activities. Well, you got dance on Monday, and Tuesday you got soccer, and Wednesday you've got hockey, and Thursday you've got this, or they're into a sport. And I'm not taking away anything from people's from children's desire to have um, activities in their lives. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm really talking about is oftentimes kids are so busy with their activities and parents are so busy with their life. Well, here's the piece with busy. Busy, busy, busy will always be there. We will never be able to catch up with it. There's always going to be that, but our children might not be there.
Yeah, that's so true. And it's really important to take time out of your day just to sit down, whether it's when they get home from school, you get in from work, to sit down round the dinner table, have dinner together, and just be a family, and to talk. And it doesn't matter what you talk about, but it's important to take a time out of your day just for each other.
Yeah.
And I think that goes a long, long way to helping everybody in the long run. It's important to sit down and have a chat. And I think so many people just don't. Their lives are so busy, so important that they don't give time to A, themselves, or
Yeah.
B, their family and their friends. They everything's got. I think that's just today's living is that everything has to happen straight away. Nothing can sort of be put aside for you time or me time. And quite often, kids nowadays tend to be latchkey kids.
Yeah.
Both parents have to go out to work to earn a crust, like you were saying, having two or three jobs. Kids come home, they're left to their own devices. If they're in that downward spiral of being picked on, they've got it at school, they're getting ignored at home, they've got it on social media 24/7, um, and even at the weekend, the parents are still ignoring them because they've got jobs at the weekend, and you can see where it goes wrong. And like you say, hindsight is a very good thing,
Yeah.
but hindsight is too late. You need to take that time to prevent it. And if it only takes 5-10 minutes a day just to sit
Hmm.
down and have that conversation, just to sit down as a family, just to take a deep breath before cracking on. And I think if we could teach that to everybody, that they just need to take that little bit of time out for themselves and their loved ones, then you pick up on something that's not right.
Yeah.
Where you just continue the day and ignoring everything that's going on around you, you miss it, and and then it's too late. And I
Well, and I
think,
think we're trying to do too many things at the same time too, right? We
yeah,
we want that instant gratification. We're scrolling through our Facebook and we're watching TV and or there's a movie on or so on. And so, when your child comes by and you say, "How are things?" or so on, you know, how many of us can manage with all that chaos that's
yeah,
being bombarded with it, right? The information on the news, cell phones, uh, the expectation of business and so on. And one of the things that I talk about is, and part of the 5 strategies of dedicated listening, is intentional time. And that means, and you just mentioned it, about, even if it's 10 or 15 minutes, even if it's half an hour, to spend with one child at a time. Because if you have multiple children, you know that each of them has a different personality, each of them have different character. And so it's important to find out where they are, what's happening in their lives, what's really going on, including having them have conversations about their cell phone and looking to see the kind of stuff that's going on. Because a quick story about that is, I had a parent come to see me one time, and she came in with her husband, and in to go back to something that you said before, they were divorced, but they were co-parenting, so they came into the school together. They wanted to have conversation with me, and said that they felt their daughter was being bullied, and they wanted her changed out of her friend or her ex-friend's class. Well, in the middle of a school year, that's kind of difficult to do. So I said, I'll speak with the teachers, I'll let them know what's going on, so that when they're doing projects and things in their classes, they'll make sure that the girls are together, and we'll monitor what's happening out, when they go outside for recess or lunchtime or so on. And I was confused about it in my head, because I always saw these two girls together and they were doing great things and so on. Anyway, a couple of days go by, and the parent of the other girl calls me and says, "I'm having a difficult time with this. I think my daughter's being bullied." So, in both of those conversations separately, I asked them if they had started to look at what was happening with the girls' cell phones, because we had just had a police officer in the building. He had met with the students and was talking about, being respectful and being really good digital citizens. And when you have conversation online, you need to be respectful. Anyway, they had had that conversation. Then I said to both sets of parents, maybe you need to take a look at the conversations that your girls are having with each other. The parents, so Katie's parents, the pair who are divorced, the mother called me again, and she came in, and she was coming in and she was a little sheepish, because here it was, because she had said before, and both parents had said this before, "Oh, well, we gave her a cell phone so she could have independence and she could be, demonstrate that she was responsible and so on." And one of the things that I had said to the parents was, the police officer had indicated that that's great that your children have cell phones. And yes, they need to be good digital, responsible citizens, but you pay the bill. And in the end, if there's anything that happens, you're going to be directly responsible. So I explained that to them too. And then this couple came back in, and she came in, she was very sheepish, and she said, I'd had a conversation with my daughter and I looked at her cell phone and I realized that my daughter was the one that was bullying the other one and not the other way around. And I mean, that situation took, I shortened the story. That situation took almost a year to resolve. And it was very challenging and very difficult. And, they weren't willing to step up to it initially, but seeing that now they are much more responsible in terms of checking it from time to time. They park it in their room at night so that there isn't continued conversation into the night, because that also happens with kids, right? They're playing on their phone, they're, playing games, or they're continuing to have conversation. And then, who's responsible for that? They're not responsible enough to put it down and say, oh, I need
Yeah.
to sleep now. And so what ends up happening with that is the next day in school, kids are sleeping during the day when they should be paying attention, right? So
Yeah.
those are also conversations that we have from time to time with parents to say, you need to check on
Mm.
them. You need to take a look, and well, I don't want to interfere. I'm trying to let them be, young
Yeah.
adults, reasonable and responsible. No, you still have the responsibility as a parent to do your
Yeah.
part of the job, to say, I want to see what's going on.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's
Yeah.
that's probably one of the biggest problems at the moment is that parents, I don't know whether they're scared to take their phones away from them,
Yep.
or to say no. I mean, quite often a parent just doesn't know how to say no.
Yep. Yep.
And
That's sometimes what happens. And they need to, that's part of the courage too. Is part of the courage is being a parent and taking
yeah,
on that responsibility. And you know what? And part of that can be in conversation as well. You know, I'm giving you the opportunity to have this phone. This is a privilege. It's not a right.
mm,
But if you want to go, because I've had these conversations with kids at school, if you believe that it's a right to have a phone, there are also responsibilities that come with it. So you need to demonstrate that you're making good choices and that you're being a good digital citizen. And when you start saying some of the things that you do and you act in this kind of way, then you're losing that privilege. You're losing that right to use that phone. And it doesn't have to be a long time, but it has to be a time where kids understand that no, you can't say and do whatever you want. Oh my God,
mm,
we have enough people out in the world doing that because they feel like they're anonymous and they're saying hurtful and really, really awful things to people.
yeah.
Where
It's
does it get you in the end? Does it make you feel better? Does it make the situation change because you can be angry and destructive and hurtful? Like, I don't get that part.
no. I don't understand the privileged. I mean, my
Yeah.
rights are being abused, and um, and it comes down to the childhood where people don't say no to them, and
Yeah.
you see a lot of kids that are so badly behaved. We only
Yeah.
go around any town and see the way kids speak to their parents, how they
Hmm.
act with other people. And when they're not with their parents and they're out in their little gangs, and the way that they behave
Yeah.
um, is and that I think comes down to being not being told no at an early age. I mean, there's a great saying. I forget who it was. I think it was Kipling. Rudyard Kipling says, "You give me the child at 7, and I'll give you the man." And I think it starts from way back then.
Yeah.
They're not. not disciplined from an early age. They're not told no, and parents just give in to them for a quiet life, and they're not
Yeah.
doing anybody any favours whatsoever,
Mhm.
particularly the child that grows up thinking that nobody's going to tell them no, and they get what they want if they create.
Yeah, and
And
if they
sometimes it
rant and rave and
just
they throw
yeah
tantrums and so on, yeah. Well,
I
and
mean
this has now become the new babysitter
yeah,
very
and
early in
you
life,
see
and
that
that's
right from sort of kids are sort of a year old, they've got their phone in hand,
yep.
they're playing games, and it starts from then, and and you see it with parents that you in restaurants just to shut the kid up, they'll give them their phone to play with, instead of saying no, give them a clip round the ear and tell them to be quiet and behave. They just
Or engage in conversation with them. I
or
mean, that's
engage in a
the other
conversation.
alternative.
Yeah, yeah,
Because oftentimes, I mean, I'll go to restaurants now and it will be a group of a group of adults or even a couple sitting across from me. I mean, I was truly amazed one day when I was in a
they're
restaurant
texting each
and
other.
this couple were both on their own phones, and it's like, well, what would be the point of being here then? Why would you
Well,
spend money to sit
I bet
across
they
from
were
each other?
texting each other.
Yeah. Yep.
Sat across
It's a
and just
different
texting
it's a
each other
different
rather
kind of
than talking
world.
to each other. It's crazy.
Yeah, it is.
But I think it's the way of the world nowadays. Unfortunately, I think that's the way it's going at the moment, and I think somewhere we need to turn the corner and
Well,
get
and
away from it.
I think we can say no to that too. I mean, certainly, when we have dinner together with our family, the cell phones go away.
Mm,
And it's just a time for us to engage with each other. And like you said, I mean, from time to time, people need to say no and they need to
yes,
explain, or they can, and they can say, look, this is a time where I want to know what's going on with you. I want you, let's celebrate achievements. Let's find out, how we can help each other, or, what's new in the news, or, just
yeah,
engagement, because we're meant to be that way. We're meant to be connected with each other.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, Elizabeth, I think we've had a we've certainly set the world to rights on the
Yeah.
youth for today. So I can just thank you so much for coming and having this conversation.
Well,
Um,
thanks for inviting me, Tim. It's been delightful.
Brilliant, and when I've learnt a thing or two, and hopefully people will be able to take something away from our conversation about the way that they look after their kids,
Yeah.
and hopefully kids will see this and think before they act. And I think
Yeah.
that's all it takes is a little bit of thought. Uh, Am I doing the right thing? Am I being a bully to some poor soul? Is my actions causing them harm?
Yeah.
And if they can just take that condor moment just to think, what's the implications of what I'm doing to this person? I think that will go a long way to curbing A, bullying, and B, somebody harming themselves.
Yeah.
So, thank you so much. Well, I think we've had a terrific conversation today. Hope you've taken something from it. Hope you're going to, if you are in that position of being a parent with young children or children and teenagers, take that time to just have a conversation with them every day. Only needs to be 10, 15 minutes just to see how they're doing, check up on what they're doing on their social media, just to keep an eye on them. And if you are detecting anything that's not right, have it out with them. Tell them no occasionally. You'll be doing not only yourself a favour, but everybody else a favour. So until next week, thank you so much for joining in, and TTFN. Ta-ta for now.